Hello everyone and welcome to Don't Be Bored. Today I'm joined by Ian Oliver, one of the designers of Gudnak, a tactical card battle game set in a dying fantasy world. Well, welcome to the channel, Ian. Please tell me a little bit about yourself and the game.
Hey Oliver, thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm Ian. I'm one of the designers of Gudnak, and in this world, the sun is dying. Nobody is handling that development very well at all. So there's different factions fighting to survive or to take control and basically determine the fate of the world. Mechanically, the game is a mix of a lot of our favorite elements of card battle games with deck construction and combos and synergies, but then the tactical positioning of like small scale skirmish games. So you actually deploy and move your cards around a 3x3 grid in 2-player or a 5x5 grid in 4-player modes, with the ultimate goal of sieging your opponent's stronghold while protecting your own. That's basically the win condition. And we tried to really just find the balance of making the game quick and accessible, but with a lot of strategic depth as well.
That sounds like a cool battle that's going to be taking place, and I believe there's 4 factions in the base game and then 2 via expansions. So let us know a little bit about what makes them different, but also what's your favourite faction to play as.
Yes, this is a tough one. So just for the sake of an overview, the 4 factions in the core set are the Refractory, who look like noble knights but are actually sun-worshipping zealots. The Sworn Alliance, which is a group of elves, orcs, goblins, a dragon, of course, and more that have basically banded together to defend these magical shards. Then there's the Gloaming, a bunch of undead skeletons and spirits that have mysteriously awakened in the north. And Delguan, which is an underground dwarven cult who sacrifice themselves to demons that look a lot like giant deep sea creatures, which is all just a wild thing to say out loud now that I say it. And that's actually where my co-guest here is from, by the way. This is the Forge Father, if you were wondering. So more on Delguan in a second, but just to quickly tease the expansion factions, the Rotborn are basically sentient AI golems growing out of rot and decay in this dying world. And the Araxi are a nomadic group that follows gigantic yak-like creatures around and weave their fur into magical cloth that they control. So it's a wild world. So to actually answer your question about favorite faction right now, every faction does have multiple archetypes, so there's something to love in all of them. But lately I've been really loving this Delguan deck because it's so unique in how it plays. The cards in your deck kind of function like your life total because of the way the sieging mechanic works. So it's a double-edged sword to draw more cards because you get more options, but you're putting yourself at risk as well. So this deck has cards that benefit from having a lot of cards in hand, and then it adds in this sneaky, bursty aspect of tunneling around the battlefield to kind of strike unexpectedly. So it's a really swingy, fun, and kind of risky deck that I've been loving lately.
Each of the factions sounds pretty different and fun, and I could see one day you really liking this faction and then another day you get the game out and you want to play as a different one because they are quite different. So that's pretty cool. It sounds like the core of the game, from what I can tell, has a trait system where a fighter with a hunter trait has a bit more of an advantage over a brute, for example. How did you go about balancing that sort of trait system?
Yes, so that was basically the very advent of the game. I had this idea that you and your opponent have units with 1, 2, or 3 power, and you fight this tactical battle trying to gain advantage through these rock, paper, scissors-like exchanges. So it's not quite so simple anymore. It's much more dynamic as we've layered interesting things on top of that. But the trait system has remained pretty prevalent throughout the whole evolution of the game. So as for balancing them, one thing that we do that I think is pretty unique is that you and your opponent's decks have symmetrical total power and the same number of these basic fighters with these traits that make up the sort of rock, paper, scissors triangle. And that's half your deck. Right, so right away, it puts you on pretty even footing to start, and then you use your unique hero and tactic cards to try and gain the upper hand. And that was honestly more difficult to balance than the sort of core basic trait relationship.
I like the way you have that half of the deck that's the same as someone else's, but then you've got like the rest of the deck. That other half is like your faction's flair to make it feel a bit different. That sounds pretty cool. What was something you learnt during the playtesting phase that sort of shaped the game, but also how it maybe that learning could help other designers out there?
Excellent question. Playtesting is so important to get your game from kind of conceptually pretty cool to actually pretty good to ultimately very fun, which I think is where we landed in my unbiased opinion. So there are a ton of little things we've changed after getting feedback from people who played the game, making individual cards feel more fun to play or synergize better or whatever else. But I think I'm going to talk about more of a macro level, kind of like philosophical one that we got from playtesting. So we were doing a ton of balance tweaks. I was playtesting a ton with Tim, the other designer, and it felt like we just kept like kind of slightly nerfing stuff. So it felt more in line with everything else. It was kind of just dialing the fun down. It didn't feel good, right? And we just kept doing that. And so eventually we kind of just flipped it on its head and we're like, well, if every card is a little broken, then nothing is actually broken, right? And so we basically embraced card abilities that could feel a bit overpowered in the right circumstances. And that opened up the design space big time because we just like weren't as scared to experiment and do these like, interesting things, interesting mechanics. And the game just started feeling way more fun because you suddenly felt powerful controlling these fighters with these like bonkers abilities, but it felt balanced as well because for one, your opponent also had bonkers cards. Two, your decks still technically have symmetrical power, like I mentioned before, which really just helps keep everything in line. And three, the nature of the small 3x3 battlefield is that it's pretty hard to keep fighters alive for very long. There's really nowhere to hide there. So the stars really have to align for your quote-unquote overpowered card to actually be overpowered. So we've kind of like applied that philosophy moving forward, and I think it's kind of brought the game to a much more fun level. And so I guess that would be the learning to pass on to other designers, that there's obviously such a thing as making a card too strong and it throwing balance out of whack. But don't be so conservative for fear of that, right? Like push the boundaries of your game's specific mechanics and constraints because that's where the most fun might live. And then just recognize when you do cross that line and then back up. But don't be so scared to kind of introduce things that are that interesting and potentially broken.
That's a great tip. Dial up the fun. I really like that. So where can people find out a little bit more about the game?
Yes, you can go to linktree.com/Gudnak for all the things. Our Kickstarter pre-launch page is live now. We have some info on the factions on our website. We post a lot of art and stuff on our Instagram. And actually, we even started posting some how to play and gameplay videos on YouTube recently, too. So yeah, linktree.com/Gudnak for all the goodies.
Awesome, that link will be in the description box down below so you don't have to go and sort of find it. And now for a bit of a fun one, what game has the best meeple in it?
Okay, I'm going to cheat a little bit and go with a game that isn't actually out yet. But they included pics of their meeples in the last update they sent out. So this game is called Crown of Ash. It's in production now. It was a Kickstarter. The art is just amazing. And their meeple are these little necromancer minions, and they just look so cool. So I'm going to go with that, I think.
Thanks to Ian for coming on and talking a little bit about Gudnak. It's been sort of really cool to learn a little bit more about sort of the design process and the game itself.
All right, yeah, thanks again for having me, Oliver. Cheers. Have a good one.
And of course, thank you to all of you watching. Like I said, the link will be in the description box down below if you want to go and find out more about Gudnak. And until next time, have a fabulous day gaming.